So, thanks everyone. Welcome to our third um, masterclass of the series. We're very excited to have Nadia Armstrong here. I think when this centre was set up, the idea was to develop collaboration and we do research across the arts and technologies and science beyond. So I think when I can't understand the description of all the words in the description, I think that's a good sign. But I'm really interested to hear you say how like you've come from like the art, fine art background and then
Totally.
with science and your research. So it sounds like you are doing all the things that we want to do. So we're really excited to have you do it as well.
Thank you. That's a really nice way to put it. Yeah, that it definitely is a journey for me, what I'm going to talk to you guys about today. It's a pursuit, kind of to kind of play on like the language of kind of from like literary modes, this pursuit of knowledge or pursuit of discovery or pursuit of the self. So I really am trying to play with that kind of experimental engagement with quantum physics. So I will talk a little bit about some ideas from quantum physics and quantum mechanics and computing. But I suppose I'm more mapping them onto like a philosophical framework. So if things are confusing, we can go back over them. But also I think it might be more beneficial to think about this in like a more speculative mode as well, and we won't get too bogged down with physics, and there won't be any maths, so that's good. But yeah, so thank you guys so much. Thank you both for having me, David and Con. It's great to be here. And yeah, I'm going to be talking to you guys a little bit about my practice first, just to contextualize who I am and what got me to this practice-based PhD project. And then I'm going to try break down some of the key terms in my work and the key terms in my research. So this is the title, Pursuing the Quantum Imaginary, Esoteric Knowledge Production and the Future of Telecommunications. It should be actually. So hopefully we'll get a little bit closer to what that means by the end of the discussion. So I'm primarily a visual artist. I think this takes a little bit of a second to skip. Yeah. So primarily I'm a visual artist. I'm a digital artist. And now I've become a practice-based PhD researcher, and I'm carrying out something called an auto-ethnographic study of Connect's knowledge formation systems. So Connect is Research Ireland's Centre for Future Networks and Communications. They're based in Trinity, and they have a few other connections with different universities. So I'm based in NCAD, and my research at Connect is concerned with the different types of knowledge that are produced in techno-scientific research environments. That's kind of like a broad description of what I'm interested in. And prior to this, I was really interested in the cultures of platform technologies. It's very fitting we have our green screen. I feel like I'm coming back home to my one of my first pieces from my BA, Digital Native, kind of exploited the conditions of the green screen as both a physical and a virtual space. So I was really playing with kind of digital performance techniques. And yeah, I was really interested in how social media and platform technologies are shaping kind of our understanding of identity and of human connection. So I was really concerned around this time, I was like 2020, with the individual who sits in front of the screen, how they access virtual space, and all the kind of intimacies that come out of that exchange between man and machine. And then my focus kind of started to shift during my MFA. I just couldn't avoid the politics of everything, and it started to get a little bit more interesting. I kind of shifted my focus to looking at like narrators of digital deceit and the people that kind of maybe don't occupy platform technologies, but kind of instigate them and kind of data that they kind of own them and control them. This kind of idea of the oligarchy or the technocracy. And we've kind of seen that sort of kind of extremized, I suppose, via social media again in the last couple of years. But actually, well, then I kind of took another shift further back, and I was kind of, okay, I'm looking at these kind of data mongers and these pushers of kind of social media platforms, and I kind of was more interested in the platforms themselves, I suppose, and the machines themselves that produce them and sustain them. And then I thought, well, I'm also very fascinated with people in my practice, and my practice is all about people. So I was like, oh, well, now I want to know about the people who make the technologies, who make the hardware, because there's this kind of emerging concept or understanding that, you know, people who handle the systems, create the systems, define the systems, are also kind of subject to kind of they're kind of shaping an ethical framework for our futures and the way we engage with these platforms. So there's like a large responsibility now on engineers and kind of people working in the field of computer science. So I wanted to know about these innovators, these kind of bright minds who are producing and defining the technology and conjuring new systems through which we live our lives. So that was kind of what brought me to this current research looking at quantum communications. But as an artist, just to quickly preface, I work with moving image, digital composition, digital performance, AI collaboration, and 3D environments. And I consider myself a storyteller who speaks through and of the digital medium. And yeah, so this is digital native, and then I kind of took a shift to looking at more urban spaces. This is just another still from digital native when it was on in Carlo a couple of years ago at the Woman in the Machine exhibition, and I loved the title of that, Woman in the Machine. It was the best exhibition to be in. I felt very seen, so I was happy about that. And then this is another edition of digital native actually that I made because I graduated from my BA during COVID. We had a lockdown, so there was no degree show. So I kind of had to think fast. And me and one of the technicians in NCAD made an immersive environment that you could play on your computer or with a gaming console or with a headset, where you entered into a space that kind of reacted to this 3-channel version of the video piece. And there was RGB lighting and the sound got kind of louder as you got closer to it. So that was kind of my first foray into immersive environments, or kind of playing with XR possibilities for video-based work. Then this was a piece called Render Me Tender. And I suppose I just wanted to touch on this as well, because I kind of took a shift from a focus on working with AI. I always just want to get my hands on the newest technologies. So quantum is like the newest of the new. So that's kind of what made me jump and make a shift from working with AI. But this was at Beta Festival. This is Render Me Tender. It's a piece about kind of more ethical engagement with machine learning technologies. And I suppose also I kind of created these characters or archetypes of future spaces that kind of were imagined through AI. And that installation, I really wanted to play with like bedroom cultures of gamers and kind of tap on into a little bit of like a feminist perspective or playfulness with the chairs there. And then that's the same work again, but in a 1-screen piece on the living canvas at IMA. So I just wanted to show you guys some images of my work to show you kind of the outcomes that happen. But now I'm kind of moved back into my research. Which is now centered around, sorry, there's lots of words here, but we're going to go through it. It's now centered around the possibility of this thing called the quantum imaginary. So hopefully today I'm going to break down some of those theories that are shaping my understanding of a quantum imaginary. And I'm also going to touch on practice-based methodologies for PhDs, and I suppose specifically in the field of media practice. So it's situated through an artist-ethnographic and cyborg feminist lens, and it's examining the systems of knowledge that underpin quantum communication technologies. So today, and this is actually the text I think that was shared that Con mentioned earlier, had lots of new words, so maybe it's good that I've picked some of these out, but I'm going to talk about the practice-based research methodologies and explore how the field, or we're going to attempt to explore how the field of quantum communications is understood through broader histories, such as science, technology, belief systems, and culture. And this is all kind of a tracing. I see my practice as a tracing of entanglements and entanglements of imaginaries. And these imaginaries can exist in bodies, in machines, knowledge systems. They can exist in aesthetics and kind of different types of agents, which we'll talk about a little bit, but to kind of all conjure up this imaginary space, which I would refer to as the quantum imaginary. So there's also this element of parafictioning in my practice, which is a creative methodology that's kind of straddles both fact and fiction. And it's kind of to build the possibility of a techno-feminist horizon through the potentialities of quantum communications, or the potentials they might propose to us or we might imagine through them. And this is all kind of, I suppose, in an effort to resist the technocracy and emerging forms of techno-feudalism, and I suppose just be part of the conversation. Because AI, we saw, like, it's been around for so long, but this kind of accelerated boom that's happened in the last 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, however long, it's become so grotesque and so extortionate and extractivist. So I suppose I'm interested in shifting the dialogue away from that type of energy for a quantum future, and really kind of looking at different policies and different kind of players in this field? Who are the agents? Who wants to get their hands on it? Who's going to profit from it? Is it actually a viable technology? You know, what are the use cases? Just getting ahead of that, I suppose, hype cycle of the technology. And then throughout the slides, I've peppered in my own little 3D elements. So if you're wondering what those are, just to say they're kind of part of my speculative world building process. They're sort of my own creative interpretations and representations of different elements of kind of quantum physics that I've engaged with or encountered during my time in this Research Centre Connect. Cool, is that okay, everyone? Yeah? Okay, nice. So just to be really, really clear, the aims of the project are consider the forms of knowledge that operate within the techno-scientific research ecosystems of Connect, so specifically in the field of quantum communications, as we know, and then also to observe the systemic institutionalized discourses that surround knowledge formation processes. And within that, I'm kind of interested in capturing dominant logics and also imaginaries around the possibilities of a quantum future. And I think that these imaginaries and these logics, because it's kind of, I suppose I'm engaging in an institutional critique, they circulate through Connect's institutional ideologies and epistemologies, and they're kind of activated by different agents within that network. And then I suppose the kind of philosophical, kind of most important, like the heart, I guess, of this project for me is to really highlight that the imaginary is crucial to knowledge production processes. And as Sheila Jasanoff, STS pioneer, claims herself, a crucial reservoir of power and action. And I'm also really interested in demonstrating how the imaginary is a crucial reservoir of power and action, and that these kind of epistemological categories around knowledge are inextricably tied to questions around morality and ethics. So I'm going to talk through two diagrams, and these are kind of, I suppose I don't know if these fully work right now, so I'd love to get some feedback on the end, or if people had any thoughts around the two of them. I'm kind of testing them out. Scientists love diagrams. They kind of speak through diagrams. That's their language, you know, and I suppose I was thinking, what would diagrams look for my particular practice that's kind of touching on esotericism, that's playing with like a feminist techno-pagan aesthetic. You know, I'm really interested in all those kind of cultures, and I want those to be part of this project. So I started to think about the axis, I suppose, that a lot of this kind of research, a lot of physics uses to communicate different things. I started to think about, you know, stars from esoteric histories or from different mythologies. We see it in Greek mythology, in Indian cultures. It's in Christianity as well, with the Star of Bethlehem. So it's all these kind of different rituals or patterns that I feel like link with the star. And then also I feel like the star kind of has this relation to science fiction. And for me, it feels like a very feminine symbol as well. So I wanted to play around with using that as this kind of axis on which different themes in my project can kind of come together or be intersected or contrasted against each other. I was kind of thinking about it almost as ley lines that map out these kind of entanglements that I'm trying to visualize. So at the top, we've got future worlds. I was thinking this is kind of the direction, you know, there's kind of the cardinal north, south, east, and west. So it was thinking about where we're going. And I suppose future worlds is what I'm trying to get at. And then I suppose underneath that, there's kind of substrate underneath that kind of fuels, I suppose, the potential for future worlds. I'm arguing is these kind of dominant logics that are circulated through the institution or through like a wider framework of knowing, or kind of through just people in general. And then we've got knowledge and the institution on either side. So there's kind of this codependent relationship I'm claiming. So that the institution, you know, it needs the knowledge, it circulates the knowledge, it propagates the knowledge and builds the knowledge, but also like it requires the knowledge itself to kind of instate itself and to become itself. They sort of have this codependency within the context of techno-scientific research spaces. And then this is kind of the second diagram, looking at the other kind of key points. And I suppose there's this parallel or this binary relationship between spirituality and technology that we see kind of more and more today, actually, in digital spaces. I think there's kind of been a sort of esoteric boom, and maybe that's just my particular bubble, but with, you know, the kind of Celtic Renaissance here in Ireland, I suppose artists kind of shifted their interest back to a pagan kind of practice. But yeah, there's kind of, this has been kind of going on since the 90s, this kind of blend of technology and spirituality with kind of ideas from like technosis and techno-paganism. and people like Alan Moore and Terence McKenna, who've kind of been talking about this stuff for a long time. So then again, if we're going what direction we're going, I really see quantum physics, I've said this to you guys already, as a new knowledge, a future world, an unknown space as well. And I think the imagination is also quite an unknown space, especially from a philosophical perspective. I think it was Plato who had like introduced the imagination problem. He was like, what's the difference between memory and imagination? And it was kind of a total conundrum, and the only resolution they could think of was that memory is something that exists in the past, but whereas it comes from the past. But actually, when you start to debunk that, it doesn't really resolve it. So the imaginary is kind of this amazing potential space. And I really feel that the science happens in the fictioning. You know, I feel like science starts as a fiction or an idea or an imaginary, and it kind of emerges as a contemporary fact. So yeah, there was kind of these parallels that I was trying to draw here to just kind of map the things I'm very interested in and that I'm trying to get at, I suppose. So around all of this is this concept of the socio-technical imaginary. So this is, I mentioned Jasnoff there briefly, but just to properly introduce her now, she kind of has this idea of the socio-technical imaginary. She's a very important person in the field of STS, which is science and technology studies. So a lot of my research comes from the field of STS. I'm kind of drawing from STS and bringing that into a creative practice methodology. Also, this is one of the only images that isn't actually a 3D model. This is one of the oldest known maps. It's a Babylonian map. And I just thought it was a really interesting artifact because it was kind of, it touches on all these themes of like belief and knowing and kind of faith in your own self-discovery or kind of a collective knowledge that's been built. And even though it's still a map, you know, we're going in the right direction. We now know after revisions and multiple measurements that this map is incorrect. So I just think it's kind of a nice artifact in that sense. And I suppose it's a good example of a kind of lost socio-technical imaginary or a past, because, you know, we can think about maps as technology too. But yeah, essentially, socio-technical imaginaries are collectively held, institutionally stabilized, and publicly performed visions of desirable futures, animated by shared understandings of forms of social life and social order, obtainable through and supportive of advances in science and technology. So I just think that's a really nice, clear definition for the socio-technical imaginary. I suppose for me, I kind of would describe it as like visions or takes on what potential technologies hold, or what perspectives kind of are gathering in, I suppose, the collective hive mind around our futures, our near and distant futures. And I think these imaginaries are constantly being like redefined and shifting through different influences from government, social media, public conversations, like our own personal hopes, and then also fears and dreams. And also like specifically in the context of researchers in Connect, they're also thinking about their own careers and their own research trajectories and their own kind of imaginaries around their own capabilities for discovery and knowledge, just like most people in working in an academic context are. So for Jasanoff, she really feels that the imaginary is this crucial reservoir of power and action, and that's kind of really the case she's making. And I suppose I'm aligning myself with that, and I'm kind of drawing a connection between the imagination, both collective and individualized, and knowledge production. So I'm trying to argue that knowledge formation systems and institutional frameworks are shaped both intentionally and unknowingly by the imaginaries that individuals circulate and propagate through their relationships within the institution or the network or the community. And I'm also kind of staking, I'm going to introduce the word entangled now, that these relationships, they're entangled and they're co-constitutive, and they're kind of like webs of interconnectivity. And I suppose this brings back in this cyborg feminist positionality that I'm trying to embrace, that takes account of human and non-human agents, and is kind of aware that there are other non-human agents that are active in shaping our realities. So our belief systems, our personal hopes and fears, and a medley of socio-political influences shape what is the socio-technical imaginary, which in turn shapes the realities of technological progress and domination, and kind of what technologies come to the fore, and I suppose also who gets to access those technologies. So I feel that our capacity to imagine future worlds, if we just think back to here, from both our lived experiences and the fantasies that these experiences sow in our minds, coupled with our knowledge and understanding of technology itself, is what kind of mediates these things. So it's Deleuze always says, you know, technologies are social machines before they are technological machines. So I don't think I've paraphrased that for sure, but it's a good quote. So yeah, I'm kind of asking questions around when we consider technological progress in relation to our imagined futures. Do we see futures that are rooted in notions of eternal progress and technological determinism, or is there space for more equitable futures that can embrace complexity and uncertainty as key principles that shape our understanding of the concepts of knowledge and the future? So I've dropped in some words there: entangled, complex, and uncertain, that we're going to unpack later because they're kind of rooted in a quantum epistemology. So this is really like the hope of the project, and it's an effort to get closer to future knowledge. And then I'm also just attracted to the field of quantum physics in general, because they really offer up new ways of thinking and new ways of things coming to be known. And they also, just like theories of emergence, they see the world in a very different perspective. So I suppose, to say it, I won't jump onto that one yet, but my research is really a tracing an epistemology inspired by quantum principles and behaviors. So that's really what I'm trying to do and what I'm going to get into now, and sort of mapping an ontology in which cyborg feminism and standpoint theory shape an understanding of our entangled positions within the cosmos. So a really simple task I've set for myself. But yeah, so my work is an auto-ethnographic project. So auto-ethnography is kind of like a new field, I suppose. It's sort of become popular recently, but it happens in artistic practice and social studies, and like it can also happen in science-based research. But essentially, auto-ethnography is taking stock of one's own personal experiences as a way. Well, I suppose this is actually quite a simple. I'll read this quote. Autoethnography is a research method that uses personal experience to describe and interpret cultural texts, experiences, beliefs, and practices. So I feel like that's a very kind of well-behaved, simple definition that does get right to the core. But I suppose for me, what's interesting about this is that as an artist, we're always bringing our personal experience, and we're always bringing like our own textures and backgrounds to spaces. So autoethnography is kind of a reminder to just be engaged in a constant reflection on my own engagement with the space, and to also be aware, if I'm looking at the socio-technical imaginaries of researchers in Connect, I too am a researcher in Connect. I too am an active agent who's shaping those futures. And I'm also shaping the ethics of my own project, and just being situated as who I am and the person I am, and the way I engage with the world is kind of, there's this constant embeddedness in the practice, which I really like because I find it hard to kind of remove myself. So in a way, it's a sort of an audacious way to do research where your own perspectives and biases are foregrounded and accepted as just kind of unavoidable things, you know, that we're always going to see through our own perspectives. And I suppose that would really have emerged in the last 2 years after spending time in Connect as a kind of feminist subjectivity. And I suppose just being an othered body in a space that's kind of male dominated. And again, as we said, my background is solely in fine art and media and visual culture. So the world of physics is quite a new space to me, but it's equally as speculative as some of the creative practices that we have in fine art. So there was kind of a connection there. But yeah, that's why these kind of images I've shown you guys, that's why I'm using all these 3D assets, because I suppose they're an exploration of what my own quantum imaginaries look like, and the textures and tropes I was interpreting as I've been engaging with these researchers. So what is it about quantum that sparks my own imagination? And then again, to bring Jasanoff back, she points out to us that reforming visions of science and technology projects are, I really like this quote, translated into imaginaries through interlinked phases of origination, embedding, resistance, and extension. So there's also this kind of energy of resistance or opposition in an auto-ethnographic project. It's often a really great research tool when dealing with really sensitive research areas, like maybe outside of a scientific field, things that are more personal or lived experiences or traumas. It can be a really interesting way to do research. So definitely would recommend people have a look at that. In other contexts, it can be really valuable as well. So yeah, I'm kind of through my auto-ethnographic lens of this situated observation of connect. And again, observation, I'm just pointing that word out to you guys now. I'm seeking to give voice to the imaginaries that flow through the research network of Quantum and Satellite Communications Working Group at Connect. So that's the working group I'm engaged with there. And Jasnov says really that these projects are kind of have the ability to give voice and agency to things that can be seen as a form of rebellion or an enterprise of re-enchanting. So there's this really great text called Performing Autoethnography, an Embodied Methodological Practice by Tammy Spry. And in it, she's situating autoethnography as a potentially emancipatory method of inquiry that calls on the body to become a site of scholarly awareness and corporeal literacy. I love that, corporeal literacy. But yeah, so it's really important to bring that body back into it and that kind of embodied experience, especially when dealing with kind of such a ever evasive technology like quantum, or we can't even see, humans can't perceive quantum physics like with our own eyes. It's not a reality that we kind of actively engage with. So it felt important to bring the body and intuition and I suppose a sense of like immanence back into that space. And she sort of talks about how autoethnography has this wildness to it, and she actually links it to the mechanism of heresy and kind of claiming heresy as a positive. So again, I suppose that's really excited me because it brought back in this idea of the esoteric or the pagan or the othered practices that maybe have fallen to the wayside. And we've put technology, I suppose, or scientific research or Cartesian logics ahead of them. So I'll read this quote out because I really like it. I have learned that heresy is greatly maligned, and when put to good use, can begin a robust dance of agency in one's personal, political, professional life. So, in seeking to recover my body and voice in all parts of my life, I began writing and performing autoethnography. Concentrating on the body as a site from which the story is generated, thus beginning the methodological practice of reintegrating my body and mind into my scholarship. So that's definitely something I am trying to do as well. And I really like that when she says the body is a site from which the story is generated. So kind of all knowledge emerges from the self in a way. And then I suppose I'm bringing in a little bit of philosophy into it now. If we think about this statement in relation to Deleuze, we can start to understand the body as a site of pure potentiality or pure becoming. I don't know if people know that quote that Deleuze pulls from Spinoza quite a lot, from Spinoza's ethics text. We do not know what a body can do. So there's kind of this potentiality within the body that for me mirrors potentialities in quantum space. So this is one of the ways that I'm thinking about my autoethnographic position, that I'm not a mere observer, but I'm an active participant in the systems which I study and I shape, and I in turn am shaped by my participation. Cool. So to get a little bit into the quantum paradigm and some of the principles of quantum physics that I'm particularly interested in, I suppose there's been this kind of shift from a Newtonian classical physics to looking at kind of quantum systems. And now there's kind of also there we have these two, I suppose, spaces. We have quantum physics and then we have classical physics. And there's kind of, in a way, I think we should keep both. I mean, there's been this kind of focus on quantum. And actually, in a way, it seems now that a lot of the engineers I'm speaking with are actually saying it's about connecting both. It's about having like a quantum system on a classical computer, and like though connecting those networks, combining those relationships is kind of where the research is kind of at its most innovative at the moment, or where it's getting kind of the most exciting, or I suppose to do heroic research, as a scientist said to me the other day, which I thought was a nice way of putting it. But yeah, so I'm really interested in how these imaginaries, socio-technical imaginaries, are reiterated into an institution's myth of how one ought to know and to discover. So I see potential in my own perspective to re-inject elements of esotericism and immanence into the dialogues in Connect. And I'm reading my position through three key thinkers, Irigaray, Deleuze, and Haraway. So for French philosopher Lucy Irigaray, women and their bodies are more in tune to the conditions of immanence, as they are constantly reframed through the perspective of the masculine dominant logic. So for Irigaray, femininity, if we understand it through the patriarchy, and she speaks a lot on the Christian myth, it repeatedly becomes what masculinity is not. She kind of has this text, this fantastic text called Speculum of the Other Woman, that kind of talks about how we're kind of this mirroring, we're kind of this, you know, we're always in reflection of the masculine. So for me, that's a really violent binary that's been quite heavily established as a knowledge of our way of being in the world. And I suppose I'm thinking, is this a fixed reality? Can we fall through the classical cracks and potentially challenge this? And we see this in scientific research across the board, knowledge around female bodies. We're just, it's lacking and it's behind, and it's also kind of mediated by a male perspective. So this is kind of common knowledge. And I think here it's also, I briefly mentioned earlier, standpoint feminist theory. I think it's important to bring thinkers like that in, and essentially people like Sandra Harding. But standpoint theory posits that the other might be more aptly positioned to engage in systems that don't conform to their needs, or to research systems that don't conform to their needs. So people who kind of sit outside of a specific institution or a specific community or group might actually be the perfect researcher to go in and kind of, I suppose, explore or observe that space. Because I suppose from the position of the other, your bias is slightly different. And I suppose you can see maybe things that are lacking. And in my case, I suppose, lacking in this knowledge formation system, where they're kind of the ideologies in connect, which I suppose is something I've been thinking about throughout this. But yeah, for Harding, she says that these strong objective positions can offer unique epistemic lenses for transdisciplinary studies. So what's really interesting around this idea that immanence, I suppose Lucy Irigaray talks about the immanence of the female body, is that immanence is a trait of the quantum world. So there's always contingency. The quantum world is always immanent. It's in a constant state of becoming, similar to kind of Deleuze's understanding of how we live our lives, that this position of difference, this constant shifting of planes and states is the foundation of our lived realities. So the image of femininity in sociocultural dialogues is also in a state of flux, and it's constantly being redefined and reshaped. And I think we also see this behavior exhibited in the quantum world through things like the state of superposition and the concept of entanglement, in which multiple potentialities are made possible. So in a quantum superposition, there can be multiple things happening at once. It doesn't work through a binary logic. It's not a 0 or a 1. So a quantum qubit has the potential to be in multiple different states at the same time. So that's a very quick definition, but that is the state of quantum superposition. And I suppose I'm really interested in mapping that on to something that can sort of, I suppose, a non-dualism, and something that kind of excavates binaries, that understands that binaries are inherent to our experience, but I suppose that tries to challenge them, shake them up, and maybe, I don't know, have a bit of both, keep a bit of both. So yeah, I'm really kind of interested in debunking an oppressive binary logic. And for this, I'm drawing on physicist and philosopher Karen Barad and her position of a gentle realism. Her book, Meeting the Universe Halfway, I would just highly recommend for anyone interested in this type of stuff. But for Barad, she posits that the world emerges as we know it through relationships and interactions between different forms of agency, both non-human and human. So I've said the word agency quite a few times, and agents. So I hope maybe that's kind of coming back together for you guys as a logic that I'm trying to build. So for Barad, then, phenomena in this sense are co-created through entangled material, social, and discursive practices of being observed and observation. And then, of course, in quantum physics, we also have the observer problem, which is when a human observes or measures a quantum state, the quantum state collapses. So it's no longer observable to us in a quantum way. It becomes a classical result. So there's something really interesting about this idea of the observer, that we're not this kind of what we thought before in this Newtonian framework of nature, that we're kind of the observer looking at nature in its entirety, when actually, similar to the auto-ethnographic position, that we're embedded in these systems, we're part of kind of nature itself, and that maybe we're more entangled and closer to different agents, or being more influenced. Not only we're influencing our realities, but I suppose how are these non-human agents perhaps influencing us? So yeah, that also kind of introduces then here, maybe it's a good time to talk about the uncertainty principle, which is from Heisenberg, and that states that in a quantum system, in quantum physics, we can never know a system in its totality. We can only observe elements of a system as observers. So there's always going to be unknowns. The quantum world is fundamentally uncertain. So you're supposed to embrace that uncertainty as a state, especially when we're thinking about knowledge production. There's always a sense of the uncertain and in the pursuit of knowledge. So I suppose I'm trying to tie together these philosophical and quantum theories into one space. So if we go briefly back to Deleuze, he's talking about reality as being a constant state of becoming, and that the position of difference is actually a primary creative force of reality. And then for scholar Nadia J. some of you might know her work, she kind of positions this idea of patterns of difference as the very fabric of our symbiotic worlds. And she really feels that through processes of diffraction, we can attend to such differences. And what's really interesting to me about diffraction is that it kind of opposes this idea of reflection. If we go back to Lucy Irigaray, who's kind of arguing that women kind of, why are we constantly positioned as a reflection of our masculine counterparts? Perhaps a diffraction is a more interesting way to think about a non-binary positionality. And that kind of brings me, I suppose, to this really, really great text by Alexis Buzzell and Raman Bartholomew called Certain Bodies in Uncertain Fields, thinking about gender through queer theory and quantum mechanics, which maps out the connections between Judith Butler's performance theory and the principles of quantum mechanics. So in this text, they're identifying that there's an ontological and epistemological shift occurring in queer theory and gender theory more generally that reflects the developments of our knowledge of quantum physics. And there's this very nice quote that I'm going to read out here. This ontological duality within physics underscores the complexity and multifaceted nature of our understanding of the physical world. Just as physicists must navigate between classical and quantum frameworks, individuals grappling with the complexities of their multifaceted identities must navigate shifting societal norms and understandings. This highlights parallels between the ontological frameworks within physics and the complexities of human identity. So I guess what I'm arguing is if we follow this logic, we can then start to think about superposition in the context of identity as an entanglement of traits, logics, cultures, gender norms that all amalgamate into a complex individual. So I think this really also then helps us to imagine or consider the idea of a non-local influence. And this is something that also occurs in the quantum world. And Barad sees this as a similarity of relationships between agencies. So I suppose I touched on that when thinking about the socio-technical imaginary, but in the quantum world, this idea of non-locality, where two quantum qubits, they don't have to be in the same space. They can be like miles and miles apart, but they can be influencing each other or communicating with each other in this kind of entangled pair situation. So there's sort of all these kind of entanglements that I'm identifying in both the way I'm navigating Connect, quantum physics in general, and I suppose the processes of knowledge formation that are influenced by imagination. And I guess I like to say that I'm searching for classical cracks, which is a little term I borrowed from John Polkinghorne, who is, interestingly, he's both a theologist and a physicist. So I really like that he himself inhabits like a strange binary that's kind of contradictory. And this is just the name of the first chapter of Quantum Theory, a very short introduction, a book he wrote, but he has loads of really fun books that are very easy to read. So yeah, I suppose I'm thinking about classical cracks as untethered spaces with which to find new metaphors for knowing technology, knowing ourselves, and for enacting ways with which to know our knowledge production processes more intimately and more intuitively, and perhaps even more impulsively. So those are kind of the features, I suppose, of the quantum paradigm mapped onto a philosophical perspective. And I suppose it's a complex positionality. And for me, it's just brimming with potential and ever evasiveness. And I feel like artists always want to get their hands on spaces like that and kind of engage with them. So I suppose that brings back to the artistic practice that I suppose what I'm engaging in is an experimental, totally speculative world building that uses this method of parafictioning. So parafictioning is a creative method that plays with the binaries of the imaginary and the real and places them in a symbiotic exchange. Dualities of science and religion, fact and fiction, social and political, narrative and philosophy, male and female, rationality and absurdity are contested in this space. The parafictional is the research mode through which material reality and the imaginary can be prefaced on the same plane. It enables us to think and observe in ways that dissolve presupposed classical binaries and foster acceptance of our embedded nature in the world. So there's a really good quote from there's this one text by Carrie Lambert Beatty that really covers a lot of parafictional research. We can get it online. The whole PDF is there. It's really great. It's called Make Believe, Parafictioning and Plausibility. But I think she just sums up parafictioning as a practice in general quite well here. Fiction or fictiveness has emerged as an important category in recent art. But like a paramedic as opposed to a medical doctor, a parafiction is related to, but not quite a member of the category of fiction as established in literary and dramatic art. It remains a bit outside. It does not perform its procedures in the hygienic clinics of literature, but has one foot in the field of the real. Unlike historical fiction's fact-based but imagined worlds, in a parafiction, real and/or imaginary personages and stories intersect with the world as it is being lived. Post-simulacral, parafictional strategies are orientated less towards the disappearance of the real than towards the pragmatics of trust. There's kind of an ethical question there with parafictioners playing with both fact and fiction, and sometimes the audiences might not be made aware of those systems. So there is this kind of mischievous Machiavellian trait to parafictioning processes, where it might feel like there's a sense of trickery. But I suppose what I'm more interested in is this idea of the kind of half and half of this kind of imaginary and the real kind of intermingling or co-constituting themselves, and kind of seeing what might come out of that. So I suppose I can't do a presentation and not put memes in it. I just can't. So I was like thinking over the last while, I suppose I've kind of been doing this for the last 2 years, but every time I see a meme that makes me think about like a quantum positionality or quantum, it feels like there's a quantum perspective in it. I'm trying to hold on to them. So I suppose I just picked out a few here, sort of thinking about identity in relation to quantum, or thinking about kind of lived experience in such a crazy time we're living in, on such a precipice. So really just thinking about the position of the outsider actually might enable you to kind of think about different worlds. And maybe I suppose a scattered person might actually, you could link that to a multi-dimensionality. There is actually studies that show that like bird patterns and fireflies, and that they are communicating in this really strange way that might actually be a quantum kind of communication. It hasn't fully been, there's a few interesting things if you look it up. There's some studies of this, that they're kind of herds communicate in a quantum way. And I suppose this idea that there's kind of the monsters, I suppose with the Sailor Moon, thinking about the struggle and kind of the shift with New Worlds and who's gonna hold on to those dialogues. We've already got like big players in the field. And I suppose Europe in general, we're kind of, in terms of the quantum race, I suppose if you wanted to call it that, we're not as far as maybe China might be, or even the UK. So yeah, thinking about shifting planes of difference, which I suppose comes from Deleuze. And also then there's this idea of Wonderland that Deleuze talks a lot about. He writes kind of a lot through Alice in Wonderland. And that kind of to me felt like Wonderland Wonderland kind of resonated with a sense of things being upside down and the classical physics being changed and turned and things not making sense, and I suppose her engagement with that, in a way I was kind of relating my own experience of falling down this quantum rabbit hole to feeling a bit like Alice and feeling a bit confused by it all. So yeah, I guess this is kind of where my research is at the moment, thinking about the relationship between these dualisms, these binaries, these and/ors and boths, or kind of, is there like resonances here between these different terms? So I'm kind of testing this out. Again, if people wanna pull on one later, we can go through them maybe a bit more. But kind of just dropping, this is like, I suppose, the point I'm at now in this pursuit of the quantum imaginary, where I'm really trying to figure out these binaries and what I can do with them. So yeah, I think I'm gonna finish up by just talking about my most recent piece. This kind of came out of the first 2 years of the PhD research. It really felt like my own imaginaries around the field of quantum communications were just like brimming out of me, and I had to make something. I had to kind of make manifest into a material reality. The stories I was building in my head, or the worlds I was kind of creating with all this new information from quantum physics. So I started to play around a lot with making these 3D assets, and looking at different kind of textures of the quantum realm, or what that aesthetic might look like. And then also coupled with this kind of storytelling practice and this auto-ethnographic position of I suppose, what if there was this character who was like, maybe she was larger than me or bigger than me, and she could maybe be the girl hero that kind of excavates and does this research. So I'm sort of thinking about her as maybe a future me, or that a potential kind of character, science fiction character that maybe I can embody in different ways. So this was sort of a parafictioning experiment into building up what her objects and artifacts and phenomena would be. So what kind of tools and apparatuses would she use, and what kind of rituals would she engage in? And so that's just a 3D asset that was kind of looking at this idea of like an ancient heart, that kind of, and this is a still from the work, so it's actually on at the moment till November 16th in the Lewin Gallery in Athlone. If anybody is in Athlone, defo go in. It's a gorgeous space, and there's some other really interesting work there as well. There's lovely paintings by Colin Martin and work by Aisling Phelan as well, and Kennedy Brown too. So there's some really interesting work in that show. But yeah, you can see the kind of expanded installation. And this was my first time making sculptures, which was a huge shift. So it's kind of strange that I was kind of making moving image work and exploring technology, and now I've gone to kind of, I suppose, what I would consider like the peak, most complex technology I could find, and I've decided to make sculptures. So I think there's something interesting there about matter and meaning that maybe is shifted in my practice. So I'm really excited to see what's going to happen. A lot of these are 3D prints. And then I also kind of constructed this wooden sword. This is the kind of cutout of it here. It looks a little bit more spectacular when it's up on the wall in the gallery, but it's kind of my first foray into, yeah, mixed media. So kind of, or physical, I suppose, sculptural making, and found objects. But this is a little text that I'm going to read. I suppose it's a parafictional text that kind of describes the project. The girl hero embodies quantum principles and phenomena. Her mode of investigation is interference. Her rejection of the binary logic is mirrored by the state of superposition. Her struggle is a path through decoherence to reach clarity. She is entangled in the social context of her endeavour to pursue the quantum imaginary, and she embraces uncertainty, recognizing it as the only pathway towards the future. So yeah, really thinking about how this character could actually embody those modes. Interference and decoherence, I don't think we really talked about today, but they are also kind of quantum behaviors. So when we kind of interfere with the quantum state, that's again to this idea of like the collapse of the quantum system, and it becomes unobservable. And then quantum decoherence is also just a trait of, I think it's like a fundamental behavior of quantum mechanics. So I suppose my next steps are, I've made these cards. They're also part of the installation in the Lewin, but it's really inviting this idea of chance, this esoteric practice of the tarot into my research methodologies. So the plan now for the next year is to engage further with the quantum researchers and really tap into their imaginaries, because I think I've spent a bit too much time in my own fantasies. I want to hear about theirs a bit more. So I've devised this kind of specific interview process where they'll pull 3 cards, and we're going to kind of have a conversation around those 3 terms. These terms have all come out of my research. We've kind of touched on a few of them today. And also some of them are kind of these, Sheila Jasnoff has these core principles that kind of define the co-production of society and technology. And they're also borrowed from that. So institutions, discourses, identities, all come from that. And I suppose vision and myth are terms that I've more pulled on. And then there's also quantum terms like entanglement and superposition. But so the idea is to talk to physicists about these terms in a totally non-scientific way, and to kind of engage more with their feelings around the imaginaries that they hold, or perspectives that they hold around these words and terms. So yeah, watch this space. That's the next step. And I think that brings me up to, yeah, time. Thanks, guys. So yeah, if we want any questions, I would love to chat.
With the very last item you just said there, where you got some of the terms from Terra is the other reference?
Oh, let's see, can I go back? This one was it, or?
This one you said.
Oh yeah, it's the instruments of co-production, and that's also Sheila Jasanoff, and that's in a text, Jasanoff, Jasanoff, and it's in a, I think that's from it's from States of Knowledge is the name of the book, and I think there's a PDF of that online as well. My necklace like broke halfway through, but I kept going. Yeah, well, thank you.
You have a question towards the end, which you kind of answered. So I wanted to ask you about just, your own experience of doing practice-based work and how you find the relationship between practice and traditional research. And then I was going to say, I found it written here, you're keeping engaged with kind of philosophical opinions of the work. And then I was going, where's the practice? But you've got it there at the end. I've seen it well, and it's absolutely class. So maybe it's just a question about your relationship with your practice and traditional research. But then I have another one, if that's okay, that maybe I'll go with first. It's just so interesting to hear your relationship with Connect and the way you're approaching it. Because I know Connect, I'm affiliated with ADAPT, and I've worked in independent institutional spaces. When I was in ADAPT, I was the weirdo art guy, and they left me to my own devices because they didn't know what to do with me. But obviously in Connect, there's lineage there. You've got Tom and Rachel, Arlen Gale, and Fiona McDermott.
Yeah.
Going back to Ben Gowlong and CTVR. I'm just wondering, have you presented this in Connect yet? And this kind of idea of institutional critique and that kind of tension and resistance that I just think is really commendable on your behalf.
Thank you.
But how's he gonna sit with all that? Those kind of
Yeah. They're such lovely questions. Thank you so much. I suppose the first one is harder, so I'll do the second one first because it's more fun. But yeah, it's actually, we really are, I totally relate to that condition of like the weirdo. That's the word for it, and that's the word I've used amongst my colleagues who are like media or communications researchers or transdisciplinary people in that space, like some of the names you've mentioned. Like it's kind of funny in Connect because they have different working groups. So we're split up into these different groups that are engaged in different fields. So what do you do with a bunch of transdisciplinary researchers then? Like what group do you put them in? Oh, we just put them in their own group. And it's there is a little sadness there, I won't lie, that it's like, well, I kind of want to be diffracted and disseminated and entangled through all these different communities. But I just kind of ignore that, and I just send emails to people and I ask people to go for coffees. And then eventually you kind of start to figure, oh, maybe I joined the quantum working group then. So I've done a few presentations with them and they're such lovely people, but I do need to practice I feel like I've finally gotten to a point where I can deliver a talk about this work that feels like it could be to physicists and non-physicists. Like I want to kind of find that communication bridge maybe, because it can come across maybe a bit too much like a communications or design project to sometimes. Like in my first year when I presented at the plenary, like people were coming up to me after kind of asking, could I make their video or their logo, and I was kind of going, what if I said that's made people think that, and like it was super flattering, but in a way, if you kind of just go with it, that starts a conversation that creates like a tension that I suppose makes me feel like I'm disrupting the system in some way, because I'm so willing to engage that I'll try. I just try keep that cornerstone of just being really willing to engage and to ask as many questions as possible, because like people love talking about their research. You can see how much I love talking about mine. So if I ask a physicist and I ask the right question, it can really start a really interesting conversation where they're actually teaching me. But yeah, it's complicated and it's challenging, but I think people, like, there's a few voices working on this really interesting project, and if people would be interested, called Not a Space Race. And there's two really interesting researchers called Radek and Harun in that space, and they're looking at quantum policy and the language around quantum policy. And it's been nice to have two more people in that field. So I'm kind of using them a little bit to kind of get in, but it's definitely a challenge. It's a huge challenge. And I also think because I'm quite bubbly and I'm quite smiley, it can work to my advantage, but it can also kind of, I don't know, there can be the sense of like you get overlooked a little bit. So I'm really excited to potentially do something at the next plenary. The plenary is like where we all meet, all the different institutions come together, and we have like a few day presentation. I was thinking of kind of setting up a little desk and doing the card reading, but I think hopefully I've built enough foundation of friendships and kind of interest in their work that, but there is a fear, and it's funny you pointed it out, that there's this kind of philosophical framework happening in my work, and it's very easy to stay in that space and to stay in the theory. Like I always say, theory is my friend, practice is my enemy. Which is not true, obviously, but I guess because I suppose have that in me, that kind of interest in the philosophical framework, it can make me procrastinate the making. So it's really fun to do Girl Hero and create something tangible and material that felt like it was coming from me rather than from the research or the theory. But it is in opposition then, because in a practice-based research, you're supposed to be thinking about the practice as a research tool rather than an outcome. So yeah, I suppose those are the challenges. Yeah.
So maybe this is a perfect segue. So Girl Hero, so looking at, we saw like the 3D rendered assets, which then became these 3D printed objects in
Yes.
your exhibition. Can you talk a little bit about the process of creating and or generating those? Like what software did you use? Like what made, like a couple slides back, you had the quantum part. What makes that
Yes.
quantum part? What went into your decision making and or sort of the theories that informed those
Yeah.
those elements of the creation of it?
No, that's so good, because as well, I think sometimes maybe I do forget to kind of cover those modes of making, like that, those really like that workflow that happens there. Because I suppose there is a lot of intuitive kind of guiding of my own aesthetic interests. But I suppose I was thinking a lot about techno-paganism. I was thinking a lot about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I kind of had these different, she has a lot of, she kind of pulls her boyfriend back through a quantum rip. So I was like, okay, well, that's a Girl Hero if ever I heard of one. But yeah, I suppose those were kind of, I was thinking about the textures of like a cyborg feminist practice, or what that would look like. And I suppose I'm kind of interested in 90s aesthetics, a little bit of like pre like hyper perfect, hyper, this kind of Apple culture of technology, or how we see technology now. I suppose more interested in those like ugly boxes, with the big backs on them and everything. I was sort of romanticizing those kind of cultures. So I think that was always in my head in my decision making. But really what happened was I was going to the network ecologies working group, going to the quantum communications working groups, and going to the plenaries. And I just started to take loads of words down. So not like sentences, but just if people were saying things, I would just kind of like strange words that felt like totally alien to an artistic practice, like things like, I don't know, like progress driven or end to end customer optimization, or just all this language that felt very like, okay, this is like the textures of Connect. And I guess I was interested in putting those then into making them into material objects, but also thinking about them through different like AI softwares. So I was using databases of kind of words and then generating, and I worked with Luma AI. I did it on Luma AI. It was one of it's like a 3D feature. So it's kind of playing a little bit with Blender and then bringing things into Luma and then looking at them through, you can kind of do like text to 3D, you can do 3D to 2D to 3D, playing with those and like building my own little databases as well, and then kind of bringing them back. So I put them through a lot of different layers of like digital processing. Some of them would actually just come out of drawings that I would do, and then I would get the AI to generate like a 3D model based out of that, and then bring it back maybe into Blender and then bring it again. So the quantum heart there was actually a really random kind of, I was applying for a course for AI and design, and I wanted to make an image that kind of felt really human and fleshy. And then I suppose I was thinking about hearts as like connectors between the mind and the body. And I was thinking about that in relation to, I suppose, like a quantum belief system or framework if we could build one of those. And yeah, I think those were all the things I was thinking about. But the decision to 3D print them happened really late. I was sort of like, I had all these I was thinking about putting the objects into a VR. Like I've so many of them, and some of them just started to feel more important than others and came to the fore as like tools or characters or weapons. And the heart really just felt like, so they're all in these kind of bell jars in the space, and they're set up in kind of like a ritualistic with like 6 plinths. And then there's kind of a set in the middle, the cards are in the middle on this kind of wooden table that I suppose kind of looks like so it kind of looks like a Dungeons and Dragons game board, but also like an altar as well. So it kind of has that the Catholicism is present there as well. But yeah, touching on a lot of different kind of, I wanted to make a space that the girl hero was in, or that her presence could be like felt in, I suppose, or that she maybe had just left her tools there and was like about to come back. Because I guess I don't really know her yet, so I was like, maybe I'll create her phenomenon. But yeah, it was essentially Blender and Luma AI and a few other AI tools, like kind of editing it to get the images closer. I used Krea AI for some of the prototyping as well.
So my question is on kind of on research methods. You were talking about knowledge production and discourses and discursive formations, and there were a lot of like references to how you want to deal with that. And maybe it's my perspective. Traditionally, when I hear knowledge production and discourses, the first name that comes into my mind is Michel Foucault, and it's like archaeology of knowledge. And I was wondering if it's a part of research how you want to deal with knowledge production, or is it like if he's intentionally left aside when you're dealing with these research?
Oh, I feel like you might have unconsciously been intentionally. Can you unconsciously intentionally leave something behind? No, I really like Foucault. I don't know his work as well as I suppose Deleuze, but I was really interested in him during my BA and looking at power structures. But I suppose I've kind of moved away from that because, in a sense, I had a lot of different thinkers that I was bringing in, and it kind of felt okay. Well, it felt to me that maybe Deleuze spoke more to like a feminist position, because I suppose, is it the politics of sexuality or the history of sexuality or something? Foucault, he doesn't even deal with like a female position in that. So it didn't feel like it was really in line. I suppose I had some really interesting conversations with people like Fiona McDermott, who kind of were saying, you know, the people you cite shape the research as well. And I guess it felt more important for me to move actually maybe, and I actually think I need to do more work on this space as well, because a lot of parafictioning comes out of like an Afrofuturist legacy. So I think bringing those voices in is really important in the way I do it too. So I suppose it became a thing of like, you have to cut the legs off the you know, your child, you know, you're kind of, it becomes all these things. And I was like, I guess overwhelmed, but maybe now I need to maybe go back. And what was it, the text that you said you meant? The archaeology of knowledge. So I feel like maybe I need to revisit, because it is probably important to take stock of those like really big hitters too. So yeah, but it felt that Deleuze sort of was situated more in a like his legacy seems to have kind of propagated more feminist writers. So I think that would be my initial reasoning. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. I did think that maybe in terms of practice based,
Mm.
like practice, maybe now because it's your end going, maybe there's more space for an acknowledgement of you also as a media artist, and that positions you to work with technology and true technology, and overlapping with practice-based research, and like drawing on the work about the kind of standard texts of practice-based research like Simon Bates and all that. But maybe I'm just
Yeah.
throwing it out there.
And I suppose I kind of come from like a systems theory focus. Like I'm really interested in people like Latour and Luhmann and stuff. But I think actually what you're saying there is a really good advice, because there's also this idea in standpoint theory that like we can have traits that maybe are oppressed in a framework or in an institution, but that doesn't necessarily make us specifically oppressed. So in a way, like, and I guess with this idea of the superposition and the way I'm interpreting that, there's like multiple potentialities within me to kind of enact different things. So the fact that I am a media practitioner also kind of actually, yeah, more justifies my ability to be in that space. So I think it's something important too. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both.
Great.
Thank you.
Interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you for very familiar to me.
Oh,
because
great.
This residency, I got with the Buddha Institute of the Quantum Residency, so I had the opportunity to meet so many artists just focused on this topic, the quantum. And a surprise for me was that most of them were relating the quantum with esoteric practices, spirituality, metaphysics, etc., which makes sense because somehow when we don't understand a phenomenon or a space wherever we go to these spaces of spirituality or religion and all that. So if we look back, we can see how these esoteric practices or pagan practices have developed through also science and etc. So you mentioned linking that this spirituality thing with the role of the artist in society and how from ourselves, which I would have some critical thoughts about how actually enact this self as a kind of masters of ceremony. You know, like we come here with, we are seers, we can see beyond and blah, blah, blah. So I'm very critical with this position. But I do understand that we have this kind of, practice that is true, that because we somehow dilute and deconstruct everything around, like in the quantum world, to make something new again. So we have to be very critical, putting apart all these structures. So the esoteric in the past, from my point of view, with and I love it, I mean, it's an incredible ethnographic field, is that they can be seen as powers, structural powers. So there were these people that they were seers and they knew more than you, and they are telling you what is wrong, what is bad. And it had some kind of social norms that were good, because don't go to the forest because the fairy will get you. To go to the forest. So somehow this needs shaped good and bad things. But always these positions of power. We think in the quantum as the liminal, the typical liminal space where the potentiality, the body without organs, the loose. And sorry, this well, I guess that.
Yeah, they're beautifully put. Yeah, really important. Yeah.
Our role.
Yeah.
So it's philosophy and science.
Yeah.
Binary.
Yeah.
So if you go to Latin American texts from philosophers, Maria Zambrano, etc., they will say that no, they are the same. What is opposed to that is the poetic gesture.
Yeah.
It's poetry. It's the quantum. Everything is possible. Everything can be. I mean, all this. Position of roles. So I think we still have to talk about
100%.
Especially about the role of artists as seers.
Yeah. And I guess I don't like that idea of the role as artists as seers, but you're totally right that in esoteric practices, in artistic practices, there's still structures of power that kind of hold or gatekeep knowledge or drip feed knowledge in ways that are really, really problematic. And I completely agree with you that I don't like this idea of like the solo genius artist, like alchemizing alone. I feel like, and maybe that's why Jazz Snuff is so helpful to me, because she talks a lot about co-production. And then I guess at Haraway too, that there's this co-constitutive realities that we're sort of so engaged with our, like, not just artists, just everybody, you know, people, I suppose, and like not just researchers or not just artists or not just scientists, just people in general are kind of, we're engaging in different energies as we like move through space, and that's mediated. And you could totally make, as you did, make beautiful kind of comparisons to that as like, yeah, this artistic practice is in a way a diffraction or a deconstruction of the world around us, which I suppose the quantum world does inherently, or that's kind of the cornerstone of the quantum space. So yeah, I really think it's important to think about the kind of, I suppose, the violence of those systems too, and that yeah, like it's not just science or the hegemony or like the kind of powers that be. Like there's power structures from the top to the bottom, you know. And I think that's really important to just kind of take stock of as well as an auto-ethnographer and be aware of that. Or and also not to fall down a rabbit hole of like, oh, this is all magic as well. Like it's not, you know, this kind of, it is understandable and you can engage with it. Like what I would love is to make quantum physics a little bit more accessible to non-physicists in some playful way that also felt like fictional. But again, I wouldn't want to betray any truths, you know. I think that's a dangerous space. And the parafiction really does play with like trust and how truth operates. So I think I need to like maybe excavate that more, maybe tap into that more and highlight that. Like there's a fabulous text by Silvia Federici called Caliban and the Witch that I absolutely love, where she kind of talks about serfs and witchcraft and the oppression of those systems. So really interesting power structures happening there in those histories. And I think if we compare that to like Deleuze with this idea of like the memory assemblage, you know, there's all these traces of those power structures in our minds and in our institutions and in our worlds. And yeah, to kind of build futures that maybe don't, that kind of lose the hard parts of that. But I do feel that with an institution, there's always going to be like this kind of hierarchy, and that's very hard to escape. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the dialogues around that, and like it's still, even though it's fantastic to be in a space like Connect, like I do want to challenge it back to kind of what Paul was saying, that I do want to kind of be a little bit of a disruptor in that space and kind of like just things like, you know, bringing in more things maybe from an artistic practice of like that there's like a 10-minute break after like a 3-hour talk, or that we all just do a little deep breath, or that we all say who we are when we come into the room. Or sometimes those things do, I feel, fall to the way in scientific like research spaces, and it's such a pity because it'd be nice to kind of create more mingling in a way. I think artists are really good at that. That is one thing. Maybe we're not seers, but I do think we're good connectors. I do think we're good at getting in there and kind of creating nodes that people can kind of tag on to. So yeah, that was such a lovely point. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Sounds like you've got plenty in common.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really excited to interview like the directors and all, like when I kind of develop this card system a little bit better, when it becomes like a process that I feel more confident with. Yeah, they're all going to be recorded. Yeah, so they'll be those interviews are going to be recorded, hopefully, is the plan. Yeah, so I've got all my ethics forms sorted for that. So that was a nightmare and a half, but I could do a whole talk on ethics forms as well. I was thinking potentially, this is all like to be decided, but I had a kind of idea, I had an imaginary that I might actually get actors to recreate the conversations. Yeah, we'll see. Because I'm a scared, I like being behind the camera or behind the keyboard. That's one thing. So we'll see. Yeah.
Thanks a million. That is amazing. I love just that idea of parafiction, and as you're talking about trust, that because like you mentioned like historical fiction, for example, and it's this notion of the kind of rules of engagement. Like if you engage with historical fiction, you understand there are certain things that have to be,
but there's a departure as well. Yeah.
And you know, and that, you know, thinking about those structures of engagement with scientific knowledge and, you know, etc. I think it's a, you know, and how we can challenge those structures as well. But and I found the as you set it up and discussed that idea of the imaginary and that kind of pagan aesthetic really powerful as a way of actually disrupting kind of modes of understanding and thinking. And so I guess I had two questions. One is really practical and simple, and the other is more conceptual. And the first is just like, I know how hard it is to do a PhD just in your own discipline. Like the actual, like one of the challenges of this kind of interdisciplinary work, and I was here as well, is like just, you know, you're already an expert in a field and you're referencing like all sorts, as well as being a you know, all sorts of really, you know, challenging conceptual work from the field of philosophy, and then you got to go and wrestle with quantum physics as well. So I was wondering just a little bit about that challenge. And then more conceptually, I mean, when you started talking about the imaginary, well, one of the things I thought about was about the kind of utopian discourse,
Mm.
and how the utopian imaginary has been so problematic around in the context of the kind of technological
Yeah.
power structures that you're talking about,
Yeah.
and whether you see a role for, and you mentioned like Afrofuturism, a kind of critical utopian discourse that might disrupt and
Yeah.
fight against some of those imaginaries.
That's yeah, I like that. A critical utopian discourse is a really cool way of putting it. Because I suppose at the moment I'm looking at utopias and dystopias. I'm sort of like straddling both. And I do think, yeah, this like technological determinism is so pervasive, and like this kind of Silicon Valley culture, and we've just seen it like go to the extreme, like in recent times. And actually, I have another piece in the Lewin's previous work called Edifice Unbound that's really looking at that. There's like 3D models of like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos kind of saying evil things, but it's a little bit more playful kind of socio-political work. But yeah, I think, I think that in terms of utopias, I think in a way some of my work leans towards that, just the things I've made, like the physical things I've made or my imaginaries. I did get a little bit carried away at the beginning of like, okay, well, if there's a superposition, then like gender is just not real. Then, that was I was taking these big leaps, and which could potentially be a reality, but it's like, I had to kind of go back and like, is that, or this idea of, okay, quantum science is not magic, and we're not like alchemizing or, creating the philosopher's stone, that it did need to kind of, I guess, come back to a material plane. But then I wonder whether leaning into like only a dystopia or only a utopia, I guess I don't know what the benefits of that would be, but I think it could be really interesting to take a utopian vision. And I know some of the artists on the Quantum Project did really touch into that like spirituality of like self-embodiment in a quantum realm and what that could like activate. So I thought that like that could be really interesting. But I guess I'm such a doomer that I know I'll bring the dystopian back in, because I suppose, and I also think even like working with AI, there is this kind of like always this unnerving feeling like running through the stuff you create. So in a way, I think I'd like to tap into both. And then the first question was yeah. So I did kind of, there's this hilarious thing that kind of maps like the hype cycle of a technology. It also maps like the hype cycle of your PhD. And you're kind of like, you're so like excited at the beginning. You're like, oh my God, I've reached enlightenment. Like, this is amazing. I was like, oh, quantum physics, that's just the world now, makes sense, And then you kind of start to go, wait, like, it was so fantastic to me. And as someone who didn't even do science in secondary school, I totally was just in the languages and I had no interest in any of the sciences. So it was totally challenging, but surprisingly, I did one really good introduction that this other artist, Dennis McNulty, who also works in Connect, he recommended, of this American guy from the University of Boston, I think, and he does it like every year, and it's just a 3-hour or 4-hour long introduction for non-physicists, and that really, really helped me. Because he was really fun and he had some really interesting, and that's where I met like these kind of characters of Alice and Bob. And then I was going, oh, so they're talking about Alice and Bob when they're talking about quantum communications, like they just say like Alice and Bob said to convey who's receiving the message or who's sending the message. And I started thinking, oh God, like there's kind of like, that's a literary device. And like, so it actually started, and what I even said earlier about the experiment being an artistic mode and a scientific mode, that actually out of all the scientists, the quantum physicists are for sure the most audacious, and they're like have the capacity to know without a grounded fixed reality, that's certain. They kind of work with uncertain fields. And I just gravitated towards that space. I felt like I could learn more from this kind of uncertain field than from like a fixed, if I engage with like the cybersecurity working group or the Internet of Things or fiber optics, like it just felt like a really malleable space. And because I'm always future thinking, I'm interested in, I suppose in a way I'm a bit of a futurist. So I'm kind of always thinking about large scale systems. And yeah, that was what really excited me about it. And the fact that it's like ephemeral as well. Yeah, so it was doable because it was so magical in a way, to me. But I think I hit like a bit of you kind of hit the trough of disillusionment, and then you climb back up because you have to go back to your own discipline then, so you have to kind of go back to actually like, but my knowledge is just as important as the quantum knowledge. And then I started to say, oh wait, they're actually very similar, these types of knowledges. So that was, I suppose, not an easy journey though, and I'm like halfway there. But I do think, yeah, the practice really needs to kind of merge now with the research in a more co-constitutive way or something. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe stemming from that. So you mentioned a lot about myths. And
Yes.
And I know the one that came up, and I know like a decade ago, one physicist at Caltech were using sort of analogies from Wonderland to talk about like separating the grain from the
Cool.
cow, kind of sort of like qualities separated from particles. And I'm wondering,
That's so
with
cool.
a lot of the language and sort of stories around this, or things that
Thanks,
you realize, did they come from analogies that were already in the field, or were from conversations that you were having, or did you put those frameworks on it, or how did you put those things together?
That's such a nice, yeah, that's so such a good question, because I feel like I really did think about the language they use and like the things they use to talk to non-physicists as well. Like there's so many metaphors and diagrams and yet terms. So I think I was going, oh, like decoherence, interference, uncertainty, all these kind of different principles and the language. I'm really interested in like syntax. And I suppose in one of my first pieces, Digital Native, I was really exploiting the language of social media and putting it into like a poetic prose. And I suppose it rendered me tender. I did that as well. I was looking at AI and all the visuals were generated by AI, but I wrote the script of these characters kind of like speaking through the technology or like speaking about the technology or kind of imagining them as like these archetypes of like of AI. But I think I have a tendency to, do that, maybe to engage with the poetics of these things. So in a way, maybe a better term is like a quantum poetics that I should be thinking about too, because I just started writing down, that's how I got all this data sets. I just started writing down all the words they were using in the space because it felt really amazing. And also, the analogies. But there is this thing that quantum physicists do say is that the metaphors all exist not in relation to each other. So like, you can have like a superposition could be like if there's drawers in a kitchen cabinet and there's plates and the plates are like about to fall out of the drawer. The plates are in a way in a superposition because like no one's opened that door, but they're still falling, they're going to fall. Like, so they're kind of in a way, but then when you map that onto like decoherence, the metaphor falls apart. Or like you've got Schrodinger's cat too, like the cat, the cat one, I'm a little bit like, I'm not as sure about because it's so popular and it's so pulpy that maybe I was more interested in other things like spin states with the coin or the slit theory you could even do on these chairs, that like, and like there's funny memes around that too. So yeah, I think I was basically, yes, everything you said, that I was kind of trying to look at my own frameworks, looking at their metaphors. And I think metaphors are a huge part of my work as well, that there's always kind of, I feel like I'm always trying to signify off to something else. So I think I liked that as well. That kind of touches on what you're asking, that would made it easier to understand, because thinking visually about these things is like how it helps me. So yeah, learning about their diagrams and what and who Alice and Bob were and getting excited about all of those things kind of was what helped me with it. But yeah. So hopefully that answers.
And I imagine because you have a myth card in your deck, so that'll generate
A new stuff, hopefully, and kind of like myths there, thinking like conversations there's so many ways that could go. We could stay in like a classical myth, or maybe we'd actually talk about like myths around technologies or myths that maybe have influenced their way of thinking. I feel like it will. And then also institutions have myths themselves. They are mythological things too, and then I suppose I'm trying to create my own myths with this girl hero character and these narratives. So yeah, myth is like a really important part of it. And actually it was a really key part at the beginning of my research. I was very much interested in like the characters in Blade Runner and how maybe they kind of contain these like mythologies that I could excavate. So there's also very interested in linking like science fiction films to it as well. A colleague of mine did an amazing thing where he was looking at Stanislaw Lem's Solaris in relation to quantum, and he was looking at the kind of tidal waves at Poolbeg actually in Dublin, and was kind of looking at them in relation to kind of some of the writing around Solaris and the ocean and how that behaves in like a quantum way, and how it's kind of immeasurable from different angles. So I thought that was really I was like, I'd love to do more things. That's why I feel like maybe bringing characters like Alice or Buffy into the story could do something interesting, because I like to kind of bring pop culture media references in too, because it makes it more accessible to people, I guess, and it's fun for me. And scientists also like engage in they like media too, you know. I'm really hoping that we'll have some really interesting conversations around their favorite films, or, you know, things they're engaged with in digital spaces or communities they might be interested in, or like kind of niche knowledge spaces that are outside of their research. I'd be really interested to see how those might help me capture more imaginaries. So yeah, I have to capture, it's still in the process of capturing, and then kind of containing all of that information will be the next research method I suppose I'll need to tease out. Yeah, there's such lovely questions, guys. Thank you so much.
I was thinking that there are so many scientists that they can't even act, for example.
Yeah.
So they say that the only way they can explain what quantum is through metaphors, that there is not other. So they found themselves in this kind of poetic, contradictory.
Yeah.
It was kind of hard to listen.
And it's a good, in terms of knowledge production as well, like metaphor is a huge part of like epistemology, or the way in which we learn and interpret the world is, you know, through metaphor. So yeah. Thank you. Yeah, do you want to finish up?
I do, but I asked a lot. The slide from the render me tender.
Yeah.
Bit. And I just had a question about like the Playboy bunny chairs, because you also mentioned sort of the cyber feminist.
Yeah.
Can you figure into this? Like, could you talk a little bit about the physical installation space?
Yeah, so this was actually, it was in the digital hub in Dublin, which is kind of, it's like a digital space, kind of like a WeWork space, but also it has a very corporate feel to it. But it was the first Beta Festival, so it was kind of in a little prefab room. So I was in the main gallery space, so I had like a cornered off space. And I'm really interested in like what I like to call like corporate realness, of like touching into like corporate textures in my installation. So I played with that a lot for one of my previous works, Edifice Unbound. But I guess I was coming off of that. I kind of just accepted this office carpet and the space, and I guess the 4 screens. It was really important that they were portrait for this one, because they kind of I wanted them to be like portals or iPhones, but also touching on like the idea of the Greek agora or the Roman forum, that they could be like columns, because I suppose I was noticing like a massive shift from like communication and discourse happening in a public space in a classical sense, to then moving to like digital discussion boards and online, and kind of we've just seen that like become, it's like kind of just like a fixed reality now of how life is. But I suppose it wasn't always that way, so I was interested in like maybe being reminiscent of a Roman structure. And then I felt like, you know, when you're like walking home at night and you look up and you see like the light, like neon lights in somebody's room in a city, and you're kind of like, oh, there's some like gamer girl in there with her like headphones and her neon lights, or some guy, or it kind of felt very like Gen Z, or I wanted to tap into that. But also the lighting above, I like put gels of blue and orange, because there's loads of research studies done that blue and orange are like the most common colors in science fiction film posters. So there's like I kind of wanted to bring, when you're actually in the space, there's a little bit more blue and orange, and then the kind of floor had this purpley pinky texture. But really I needed seating, and I wanted to do something innovative, and I kind of felt like, even though in a way the work is more about kind of like, I suppose, rendering with tenderness, like giving love to kind of machines, or kind of being more open-minded about our use or treatment of them. But it felt like there could be something really intimate and fun about putting the audience in those chairs and seeing like who would sit in them and who wouldn't was also a part of it too. So they weren't as like directly rooted in the work, but I think they were more like, yeah, building a kind of female aesthetic, injecting a femininity back into it, but being playful and kind of maybe a little bit tacky about that as well, to kind of embrace the camp of it. But in hindsight, in hindsight, I've had conversations about this work since then, where like, as interesting as the chairs aren't fun as they are, it kind of it became, I worried, was it slightly reductive because it like brought in a new kind of, I don't know, a new space. But then also, I guess I was just thinking about people like at home in their rooms, like clicking and engaging with AI, or like having an intimate relationship with like ChatGPT, or, you know, these kind of like personal experiences of the technology rather that are really intimate and private. So I guess I was tapping into that bedroom culture. But I think if I was to exhibit this again, I wouldn't use the chairs. Yeah. Just because I think it brings in like maybe too many dialogues, which I have a tendency to do, as you guys have probably learned from today. But in a sense, when it was on the large single screen, it was very impactful. And it worked really well in that way because it has a kind of theatrical, I use a lot of kind of theater tropes and like cinema tropes in my moving image works. So yeah, and it was kind of also, I really like the work of Hito Sterl, and she always puts like crazy seating. So it was kind of a test to do something more fun, and we had a bit of budget, and I was like, well, we just do it. And people really liked it, you know. So yeah, thank you guys.
Just one question about whether you'd be willing to share the slides or
Oh, yeah.
bibliography.
Yeah, I could definitely do a bibliography. Yeah, I can share the slides. That's no problem. And I'll put but I think, yeah, there was a few names I mentioned that aren't on the slides. So maybe I'd put in an extra slide with all of them. So I've no problem doing that because there's loads of really good resources. And most of the stuff is available online, or probably hopefully through libraries here and stuff.
I think you have the prizes, the most questions ever.
That's so good. The questions are always the best bit, you know. So it's thank you all so much. Thank you for your time.